Everybody's favorite tournament is back. Leagues Cup returns for the quarterfinal stage with 8 teams remaining. Of course, 4 from each of Liga MX and MLS, all still pitted up against each other for this quarterfinal round. And it's not just the silverware at stake, it's also qualification for next season's Champions Cup. The quarterfinals run from Tuesday, August 25th to Wednesday, August 26th, with 2 games on each night. The first night will feature Monterrey versus Chicago Fire and RSL Real Salt Lake against Club León, with Wednesday's matchups featuring Toluca against Austin, and to wrap things up, Club América versus Columbus. I think it's truly a mixed bag of teams remaining in this competition as far as expectations. I think you would say 4 out of the 8, including the 3 Mexican powerhouses in Toluca, Club América, Monterrey, are all obviously either have been champions previously or are usually expected to perform based on their squads, and the following of their clubs. And I add the Fire into that 4 because of the recent year and a half now under Berhalter, how their expectations and the trajectory of the club have gone, in a positive light. And I think you would say the other 4 at the moment, especially considering where they are in the standings, the 3 MLS teams of those 4 in RSL, the Crew, and Austin, either outside of the playoffs or just barely scraping by as it stands and sliding down their respective tables. And then Club Leon as well. Those 4 really, this you would imagine would be their only path towards silverware this season, or of course a berth in Champions Cup, which would do wonders for growing and putting their club in a better competition that they're not really used to. So let's dive into these quarterfinal matchups. I'll get you everything you need to know as far as all the context surrounding these teams, lineup predictions and expectations, analysis, and just a lot of tidbits for each team going into this one, and of course some predictions to follow. So if you're interested in MLS content like this, and of course Leagues Cup content like this as we get into the latter stages and the knockout rounds, please make sure to like this video down below and subscribe to the channel. Our first quarterfinal matchup is between Chicago and Monterrey, and I just want to preface all of these by saying something that I forgot to mention, which is that all these games go to penalty shootouts. If tied, there is no extra time, so just keep that in mind, that teams could be playing for penalties late, or not, considering if the game is tied late. So that is one other kind of wrench to throw in there. But regardless, the Fire hosts Monterrey here. It's not going to be at their normal home stadium, Soldier Field. It's at their previous home SeatGeek Stadium, and it's not too far away. And they played all 3 of their Phase 1 games here. And of course, they were the only MLS team to go perfect 3-for-3, beating Cruz Azul to cap that off as well. A very famous win for the club. Meanwhile, Monterrey, it looked like all was dead and lost due to the formatting of Phase 1 after they lost the first match against Orlando. But they had 2 come from behind victories in the next 2 games against Miami and Nashville, and that propelled them into the final 4th seed, and help from other teams losing out on the last match day in Liga MX to get them into this matchup. Of course, the Fire are the number 1 seed on the MLS side of things, and they enter this matchup on a 7-game unbeaten run that, of course, started before Leagues Cup, but they've also basically ran the table in MLS since Phase 1 ended too. But in their most recent matchup against the Red Bulls this past Saturday, they tied 1-1, but that was kind of a game you throw away. And the fact that they even tied because of how much rotation they had was also impressive. Berhalter has a lot of depth to rotate through at most positions, especially the wingers and the fullbacks. So majority of the starting 11 sat, including of course Lewandowski, who had played basically about 6 straight games before that. So much needed rest for him and most of the guys. So they should be fresh and ready to go for this one. Of course, they were prioritizing this. The big news for the Fire is that Orahel, who played a lot at midfield, especially, kind of got his first minutes in a long time. Um, during the League's Cup first phase. He's been injured since about that Cruz Azul match, I believe, with a lower body injury, and still no real update on him. Hasn't gotten any playing time in MLS, so he's doubtful, and that might slot Pineda into the midfield, but we will see. I expect, of course, Saletros, Davila, and probably Pineda as that three. And then we'll see. We'll see. Maybe it's Zinkernagel, and then you have two wingers outside of Lewandowski. So that would probably be the more likely thing. But also, personally, as a Fire fan, I think Dite needs to start over Bamba for them to have a real direct threat in this one. Bamba is, of course, direct, but he's just been so inconsistent. His DP tag has been looking worse and worse. That deal by the week, and he could not deliver in that Red Bulls game most recently as well. Dite had, of course, the goals against Cruz Azul, and has just looked really, really good despite his youth. So I think he needs to start on the left, and of course, it could be Zinkernagel as one of those wingers. We'll see if he plays him at the 10 or not. But if not, you could see one of those other wingers start instead. And then as for Monterrey, of course, the big news that Kuipers, the Fire's previous striker who moved on after Lewandowski came, essentially refused to kind of play in what Berhalter was going to make a two-striker system. He returns here. He scored the winning goal against Miami in that comeback. I think he scored one against Nashville as well. Maybe it was the winner too, if memory serves me right. But this is a new look attack for Monterrey, but they've been guns blazing. They also have, of course, Diego Rossi, who transferred from the Crew, who are also in these quarterfinals, which we'll get to. But they have a loaded attack and a pretty solid roster. It's just about that defense has still been very, very leaky. Outside of League's Cup in their 5 Liga MX games so far, they've only held 1 clean sheet. That was at Atlas due to the fact that Atlas got 2 red cards, and one of those was super early. But regardless, they've conceded in every single match besides that. Their other 7 out of the 8 matches. And most recently, they lost to León, despite León getting a red card in that game. When they were only up 1-0, they lost 2-0. And just could not come back, and they did not rotate for that. That was a pretty strong lineup. So they're, of course, going to go full strength here. But it's a little bit concerning for Monterrey. They're, of course, been known to choke in the Liga MX playoffs recently. I think especially on the Fire side of things, they make games very stretched, very open because of their directness, the wingers, and it just leads to back and forth games. And I just don't see a world where both of these teams don't get plenty of chances, and it's down to the execution. I think it's especially down to Monterrey on their side of things to just show that extra level as far as finding their chemistry so early on in the season. Both these teams have really left it late as well, especially in their Leagues Cup games. Monterrey, of course, needing those comebacks. The Fire as well, though. 6 out of these 7 goals they've scored in those 3 phase 1 matches came after halftime. They were down 1-0 against Santos at half, 0-0 at half to Cruz Azul, and then up 1-0 against Necaxa. So both these teams have kind of bloomed late. Maybe I wouldn't say they've had timid starts, especially the Fire in their 3 games, but it's about just that intensity, bringing it up a notch, and they've both found a way to be clutch. So I think it's relatively even as far as the firepower goes. The Fire have, I think, the more cohesive team at the moment, and I think they are deserved favorites. But once again, I just don't see how this doesn't have fireworks. I don't think the occasion will get to these 2 teams, for lack of a better term. I just think Berhalter has no fear as far as setting up this team for putting the opponent under pressure. So that might lead to a lot of transition for both teams. And it's up to Lewandowski, who I think, even though he scored recently, has also not lived up to his level of just being that kind of a poacher and having that killer instinct, because he could have had far more goals in that Leagues Cup first phase, especially. But he's still going in with the team. And regardless, I'm going to be at the match. So if you're actually in this section of the stadium, as we see in the background, so if you're there, come say what's up. I'll be supporting the Fire, biased, but regardless, I'm going to go for the Fire to win. Potentially goes to penalties. I'd say the Fire win 2-1, potentially a 2-2, but I'm going to trust my heart over anything else. And I think Rayados will choke again in these playoff phases. Tuesday's second quarterfinal matchup features Club León, the first seed out of Liga MX side, against RSL, who snuck in despite, once again, not taking maximum points from the first game and not winning that shootout against Tigres. They ended on 7 points, and that was just about enough due to their fabulous goal difference that they racked up in the next two games, despite also just winning. Besides that, they ran it up and they knew they needed to. So the problem for RSL is that outside of that, they've been really, really poor since the World Cup break, since MLS returned to action. They have not won a game in their 6 MLS games after the World Cup. Most recently, they played at Orlando. They're only going to have 2 days of rest between that, while León has the extra day playing Friday. And that doesn't completely matter for RSL since they fully rotated the squad. Basically, about 10 out of the 11 players were benched who should be expected to start here last game, but still the travel could, play a factor. And this is closer to RSL than anything. It's actually at their biggest rivals' home ground in the Rapids. So it's still going to be at elevation, which could lend them a slight advantage. But León, I don't think anyone saw this coming. They didn't really make too many, you know, incredible signings recently. They've kind of retained most of the same squad. Arcila, Cambindo, Cortizo, especially in attack. They had these guys last season. They were just average, whatever. And they're now riding a 6-game winning streak in all competitions. And of course, we're the only Liga MX side to go perfect 3-for-3. So Arcia especially is having his best season almost just in this stretch as well. Just from this stretch alone, 7 goals in his last 6 appearances during this winning streak. Cambindo, the striker, who has been a killer the past 2-3 seasons before this, is now becoming more of an assist man, essentially for Arcila. But of course is also a liable and very dangerous goal threat. And another fun caveat is that they've also won each of their last 2 Liga MX games despite being red carded and having at least a man down in each. So they're just finding and inventing different ways to win. They're being very clinical, drawing penalties as well, despite being down a man in some of those matches. And they're really the surprise package, I think, of this League's Cup. And I think it's anyone's bet. I think RSL is going to have the far higher turnout in Colorado, considering how close they are. So we'll see if this really feels like a León advantage. They just gave them the advantage due to the seeding. But of course, none of these games are actually going to be played in Mexico, I believe, for the knockout rounds. Since these quarterfinals, the higher seeds on Mexico side are getting preference and advantages, but it's not actually at their home stadium. So I think the line as well is just super, super tight on this one. RSL really has been in poor form, but Leagues Cup has given them another route, and they're clearly prioritizing this. Solans has been leading the line. I think if RSL wants to not steal this game, but advance, Solans really has to not step up, but be just more of a clinical finisher. Because although he has the 5 goals in his last 6 appearances, the way he scores, he it's almost like Nicholas Jackson for Chelsea. Like he literally misses the easiest chances, but then he'll score like the most ridiculous, like, you know, deflect turnaround shots, like tight angles, chips in the most recent games. So in a game like this where chances might be at a premium, or you need to convert, I think he's going to be the difference maker. Luna, of course, is going to be pulling the strings, um, but we'll see who RSL starts on the right kind of wingback side of things, whether it's Marchuk or um, Lobjanidze, and who gets the nod there, because Booth, of course, has been out the past couple of games. But yeah, I think honestly, this might feel a little bit more comfortable for RSL than we'd like to think, just due to where it is. They could have a good support, and it only takes one good performance to turn things around. So this is a great opportunity for the club to make waves in a competition, and they know they're 1 win away from a very good chance at next year's Champions Cup. So I think this one could also sneakily have goals in it, but I predict that it goes to a shootout. I'm going to go for a 1-1 draw, and ultimately, I think due to RSL's recent kind of experience with that, I think they just edge it out, but it's truly anyone's guess. But I think it's a draw and we see penalties. We move on over to Wednesday's portion of the quarterfinals, and we start with what is likely the most straightforward, at least on paper, matches on the slate, with Toluca against Austin. Toluca has the higher seed. Actually, might be wrong about that. I'm not completely sure, but regardless, since Toluca was the #1 overall seed in the standings before Leagues Cup, they hosted 2 games at their actual home stadium in Phase 1, and now regardless, they're getting some preferential treatment, and so this will be essentially a neutral game, where the Red Bulls play in New Jersey. So Toluca, as we know, I mean, there's not much more to say. They, at least in my opinion, are just the best team on the continent when fully healthy. They're still awaiting the return of Paulinho, especially the striker, who scored boatloads of goals for them, and of course was crucial in helping them win last season's Champions Cup, back-to-back Liga MX titles. But of course, they signed Viñas, who was previously at León 2-3 seasons ago, just was with Oviedo in La Liga, who got relegated. But despite that, he scored, I think, almost double-digit goals. And so far, he's come back to Liga MX in flying colors. He's perfectly fit for this attack, and the tactics for Toluca. 3 goals in 6 appearances, and I'd say about half of those have been off the bench, as far as the appearances. So he's already contributing. He's filling in. Um, and Gallardo, who of course is essential as one of those fullbacks for Toluca, he's been rested and not even in the team sheet for the last 2 games in Liga MX. So completely preparing for this one. This is essentially the only tournament they don't have. They've basically won everything, right? They can win in the past season or two. So you would have to think they're really prioritizing this. Vega also was subbed off at halftime of their last match, which they also won down a man against Querétaro. And Austin, on the other side of things, they somehow are here. I really don't get it. Obviously, of course, their first 2 opponents in Tijuana and Puebla were some of Liga MX's bottom feeders. Tijuana is now more average, right? Mora is lifting them up. They don't have a terrible roster, but also, those teams were kind of throwing in the towel lineups wise. I don't even think Mora started against Austin when they played. But regardless, it was kind of just a flash in the pan, this Phase 1 out of Austin. They tied Club America in what was essentially, you know, a game where both teams had 6 points, not too much, you know, at stake. They kind of were both kind of playing for that draw there. They did have to come back to earn it, and then winning on penalties is anyone's guess. So regardless of that, Austin is just awful. If you've watched my MLS content, you know that I have not been a fan of this Austin side or the ideology philosophy for the past 2-3 seasons. The coaches have not no coach has fixed this. It's still too rigid. It's not free flowing enough. Um, and they're not getting the best out of some of 2 or 3, actual, I think, decent attackers that they do have. Um, and it's really only been Uzuni now. He's what propelled them to this stage. He scored 4 goals and an assist in those 3 Leagues Cup Phase 1 games when he has just 6 goals across, what is it now, 23 or something MLS games this season. So he's found some form. Erwin Torres has stood out. I think once again he needs to be included in the starting lineup. And actually at the time of this recording, they also Austin sold Jaden Nelson, who I think was another bright spot on in the wide areas, over to somewhere in the English Championship for a very low fee, like 1 million or something. But that's another option gone. Another creative option gone, direct option. Um, and Austin's not at home, where they have just 6 points in 11 MLS away matches. So even though this is a neutral field, I would consider Toluca to fill this stadium out more than anyone of the two teams. And I just don't see how Toluca struggles, unless Austin is going to sit in, which they like to make games boring. It could take a second for Toluca to get into the flow of things, but I just think they should have constant pressure, possession, and should have no problem dispatching of Austin. I think it's the most straightforward matchup on the slate, and Toluca should have no problem handling this terrible Austin team. Our final quarterfinal matchup pits Club América against the Columbus Crew, and these two teams couldn't also as well be farther away from each other as far as form and standings in their respective leagues at the moment. Club America had only one game that it hosted in Phase 1 against San Diego. It got them off to a flying start. Then they beat the Timbers on the road in a really good game. And then against Austin, a bit of rotation, a bit of, not fully full, pressure and intensity, but they got enough points to get into here, and that's all that matters. And they're still unbeaten so far in Liga MX in this Apertura first half season. Meanwhile, the Crew, although they, had once again one of these MLS teams that somehow is here, they beat up on a few poor teams in Liga MX. They are now, after their most recent loss, in which they conceded 2 stoppage time goals to Nashville after being ahead. After that loss, they're now bottom of the MLS Eastern Conference, even below Atlanta and Montreal, teams of that nature. And they're now in a 3-loss streak since Phase 1 of Leagues Cup as well, losing to Montreal, losing to Nashville, and the other team slips me. But regardless, the Crew have a lot of problems. Mendez, who of course was supposed to patch some things up, his only goal contributions have come in Leagues Cup Phase 1. None so far in MLS play. And you also have Camacho out on that back line with a foot injury, which adds to those defensive concerns. This matchup's going to be in LA where the Galaxy play. This is kind of, in my opinion, going to be Club America's home away from home. They've kind of played here, I think, recently because the Campeón de Campeones is played here like every season, at least the past 2 or 3, and other kind of friendlies. So, of course, in LA, you're going to have a huge Club America contingent of fans. The Crew are going to have to travel West Coast. And they're just in terrible form. Now, the big question for Club America is who starts at striker. I don't think it's more of a question, but just bear with me because of the context of, I think, from at least what I've seen from Club America fans. kind of debating whether Henry Martin actually should still be around. Obviously, he's been in great form recently, especially scoring the 2 goals in their most recent match against Juarez. One of those was a penalty, and that put him to, I think, 120 goals for the club, 100 in Liga MX play. But Cervantes started a couple games in phase one. Um, and of course, he's still super, super young. So obviously, I expect Martin to go here with, of course, Vega, Rodriguez, and Violante. They did rest a couple, I think, of their kind of holding midfielders in that Juarez game. But I think once again, they have a couple of really, really talented players, especially Vega and Rodriguez are really dynamic, um, and can really be killers. But it's just overall balanced, in my opinion. They've kind of recovered from the last season and a half of being pretty mediocre, and I think it's just not relying on one individual now. They have kind of a Swiss Army knife of options to kind of attack you with, and they are playing with, I think, a lot of intensity. And of course, they haven't really featured or been competitive in Champions Cup recently, so this is a big, big um, opportunity to win a trophy early on in the season before they get back to Liga MX play for the big chunk of the Apertura. And of course, the history between these two teams that the Crew knocked Club America out in the 2023 edition. I don't remember what round it was, but yeah, so there's a little bit of, you know, bad blood between these sides. And, I think we have to take all that context into consideration. The Crew did a good job of getting here, but they're really lacking at depth at the moment. They're playing Adams as their primary striker, with Abu Ali who's out for the season, and they're really gonna have to pull some rabbit out of the hat here, I think, to contend with Club America, who will just have too much. It will literally feel like a home game in my opinion, and they're just they haven't been scarred yet. They've been battle tested, I would say, right? But have been up for the challenge every single time. They look like back to almost their best as far as being one of the best teams on the continent, and of course contending for the Liga MX titles in the near future. So I think the Crew, even though they rotated ahead of this and fought hard against Nashville, I think this is where they bow out, and I think that would make it, at least for my predictions, an even pair from each side of MLS and Liga MX, making it into the semifinals, which would set up Club America against the Fire and RSL against Toluca. So we'll see how it all works out. Let me know your predictions down in the comments below. But I think we've got some tasty matchups on the horizon here, and we'll see how it all plays out.